Some murders shock because of who committed them, others because of how they were carried out. This one endures because of what it revealed about trust, about isolation, and about how easily a child can disappear in plain sight. In the summer of 1867, an 8-year-old girl went outside to play with her sister and a friend. Her name was Fanny Adams. In the mid-19th century, Alton was a market town defined by routine. Days were shaped by agricultural labour, domestic chores and the quiet rhythms of rural life. Children were rarely supervised in the modern sense, and they played where they pleased, simply watched over by distance rather than by adults. This was not neglect, it was normal. Fanny Adams was just one of 6 children born to George Adams, who was a bricklayer, and her mother, Harriet Adams, who earned money by helping with neighbourly chores. The family all lived in Tanhouse Lane at the northern side of Alton. She was tall for her age and appeared older than what she was. She was known locally, often seen playing outdoors with other village children, and she had no reputation for mischief, no history of wandering too far from her home. On a hot, sunny afternoon on Saturday, August the 24th, 1867, she left her house to play with 2 other girls in the nearby hop fields of Flood Meadow, a short walk from her home. One was her 7-year-old sister, Lizzie, and the other girl was her friend, 8-year-old Minnie Warner. The area was a place children had played countless times before. Frederick Baker did not arrive in the field that afternoon by accident. He was 29 years old. He was educated, articulate, and socially isolated. He was employed, working as a solicitor's clerk, a respectable position for Messrs. Clement and Son. Those who knew him described him as reserved, strange, and prone to intense moods. He was not, however, openly violent. But that afternoon, Baker entered Flood Meadow and noticed the children. 3 girls, together, unsupervised. He approached them. Witness testimony later established that at around 1:30 p.m, Baker spoke to all 3 girls, attempting to draw them into conversation. When they hesitated, he offered them money, small coins, held openly in his hand. Baker pressed the coins into the children's hands, 3 halfpennies for Minnie and Lizzie to waste on sweets, and a single halfpenny for Fanny. Some sources say that Baker was known to the girls, as they had seen him before at church meetings. This may well have been the reason why the girls were unconcerned about taking the money. This was not cohesion in the obvious sense, it was suggestion, it was enticement. Baker lingered nearby, watching in silence as the girls ran back and forth along the hollow, the narrow lane leading towards Sheldon. They were laughing, smearing their fingers with juice they ate from blackberries that Baker had already gathered for them. Time dragged on, and after nearly an hour, Minnie and Lizzie grew tired and decided to return home, leaving Fanny behind. It was then that Baker moved closer. He asked Fanny to walk with him to Sheldon, but she refused, and her refusal would change everything. In that moment, Baker seized her, overpowering the child and carrying her away from the lane and into the dense cover of the nearby hop garden, where no one could see and no one could hear. Once isolated, Baker led Fanny deeper into the flood meadow, away from paths, away from sightlines, into an area where the hop plants grew thick and high. This was not an impulsive act, it was controlled. And the field did not offer immediate concealment, but it offered time, enough time to act, enough time to ensure no one was watching. Minnie and Lizzie had made their way home, but when they told of their story, Minnie's mother, Martha, ignored it, leaving the girls to carry on playing as nothing was wrong. By 5 p.m. that afternoon, concern grew when a neighbour called Mrs. Gardner asked the girls where Fanny was. When told what had occurred in the fields, Mrs. Gardner ran to the Adams family home and explained what the girls had told her. Now worried, both Harriet Adams and Mrs. Gardner hurriedly made their way towards the hollow, and in doing so they encountered Baker making his way in the opposite direction. "What have you done with the child?" asked Mrs. Gardner. "Nothing," he replied. He then told them that Fanny had left to rejoin the other girls, but from all accounts his demeanour was one of respectability, and once he had explained that he was a clerk of a local solicitor, Harriet and Mrs. Gardner allowed him to leave. By 7 p.m, and with still no sign of Fanny, a search party was formed and lanterns were lit. Fanny Adams was violently killed. What remained of Fanny Adams was located across a wide area of open land. The injuries were extensive, and the violence involved was immediately apparent to those present. What they would soon encounter was sheer horror. First clothing, then flesh, then the realisation that the child they were looking for no longer existed as a whole. The desecration of Fanny Adams' body was incomprehensible. The right ear had been cut away, and deep slashing wounds ran across her head from the mouth towards the temple. The head, arms and legs forcibly separated from the torso. Multiple incisions were found across her chest and arm, cut with such force that muscle had been divided. One arm had been removed at the elbow, while a leg was almost severed at the hip. The other had been torn entirely away. Her body cavity had been emptied, and further cuts had been inflicted upon her internal organs, including the liver. Her heart had been removed. Her vagina was also missing. The final discovery underscored the calculated cruelty of the act. Both of Fanny's eyes had been taken from her head and later recovered from the nearby River Wey. Several villagers were unable to continue the search. Harriet collapsed whilst making her way home to inform her husband. Other villagers were sick. Now George Adams, after being told of the grim discovery, he loaded a shotgun and went out to look for the culprit, but he was stopped by neighbours who would later go on to comfort him throughout the night. Flood Meadow became a crime scene, but the horror could not be contained. The following morning, hundreds of people visited the field where Fanny's scattered remains had been discovered. They helped collect most of her remains, and everything apart from an arm, foot and intestines were found. These were discovered the following morning. Fanny's remains were later sent to a doctor's surgery where a post-mortem then took place, and it was here that the body parts were also sewn together. Investigations into the death of Fanny Adams soon led to the arrest of Frederick Baker. After hearing that he had been seen speaking to the 3 children before Fanny's disappearance, Superintendent William Shaney traced Baker back to his place of employment. At his workplace along Alton High Street, police found Baker still wearing his blood-stained clothing. His boots, socks and trouser bottoms were wet. "I know nothing about it." Without hesitation, Baker was escorted to the Alton police station. An angry crowd had already arrived at the solicitor's office where he was arrested. At the police station, 2 small knives were found in his possession. One of them was stained with blood. However, it was claimed that neither of these knives had been used to murder Fanny. Upon further investigation, Shaney went back to the office Baker worked at and he discovered a diary. An entry written on Saturday the 24th of August 1867 read, "Killed a young girl. It was fine and hot." Investigations also continued through and until October, during which time Baker had been transferred to Winchester Prison. Interestingly, a young boy, Alfred Pince, would become a prime witness after he testified that he had seen Baker emerge from the hop garden at around 2 p.m. on the day Fanny was murdered. Baker's hands and clothes were saturated with blood. An initial inquest into the death of Fanny Adams took place on the 27th of August 1867 at the Duke's Head Inn public house. After witnesses had come forwards and with enough evidence to place him at the scene of the crime, Frederick Baker was committed to Winchester Jail to await trial. The trial was swift. Newspapers printed graphic details, fueling public outrage. And on the 5th of December 1867, the courtroom heard every element of the crime in full, and despite Baker's defence trying to argue that he was insane, the jury deliberated for around 15 minutes. The verdict, guilty. The sentence, death. There was no appeal. Frederick Baker was executed on Christmas Eve 1867 at Winchester Prison. Now, whilst held in his cell and awaiting the enactment of his sentence, Baker confessed. He would go on to blame an indulgence of drink for murdering little Fanny Adams. In his confession, he told of how two of the children, Minnie and Lizzie, had, after some time, left the fields, leaving Fanny all alone. He then took her into his arms, and whilst he said he had behaved indecently, he did not attempt to violate her, as had been suspected. Fanny had struggled and began screaming. Baker took out his penknife and cut her throat with his left hand, and then severed the head from the body. He went on to say that this took as little as 2 minutes to complete. He then immediately scooped out the eyes and carried them in his hand, and had them with him when he opened the Alton churchyard gate for a Mrs. Murray. Baker was astonished that Mrs. Murray did not notice his bloodied hands. After throwing the eyes into the River Wye, he returned to the office he worked at, carefully cleaned the knife with water, and then he began to oil it. He then later returned to the fields and used a stone to batter the head before cutting away the limbs from the body. Baker returned to the office. He went on to make an entry in the diary, which was at around 7 and 8 o'clock that evening. He also admitted to blunting a knife for the purpose of misleading the police in case suspicion would fall upon him. The timing of Baker's execution disturbed many, but the sentence of death was set in motion, and with the drop of the trapdoor, his life ended quickly. It was reported that between 5,000 and 6,000 people turned up to watch the public execution. Such was the intense scrutiny of the case and the shocking details that had emerged in many of the newspapers that had shocked the entire nation. Baker's execution was the last public execution to be held at Winchester Prison. Fanny Adams was finally laid to rest on Wednesday the 28th of August 1867. The burial saw a large number of persons assembled to witness the funeral, with dozens of wreaths placed upon the coffin. George and Harriet Adams, parents of poor Fanny, watched on as prayers were read. Fanny Adams was just 8 years old when her life was cruelly taken from her in such an horrific way. Her life ended in a field where help was close, but not close enough. And yet her name lives on, emptied of meaning, spoken without pause, without memory, without respect. In the years following her murder, tinned mutton was issued to sailors of the Royal Navy. The meat was poorly regarded, grey, fibrous and barely edible, and among the seafarers, black humour became the way to dull the monotony and discomfort of life at sea. In time, a grotesque joke took hold that the contents of the tins might as well have been the remains of Fanny Adams herself. Once emptied, the tins were repurposed as mess containers, casually referred to as fannies, the name slipping further from its origin, stripped of meaning, stripped of any sympathy. And it was during the First World War the phrase followed soldiers into the trenches, likely carried from the decks of transport ships bound for the front. There, amid mud, hunger and constant loss, Fanny Adams evolved yet again, softened into Sweet Fanny Adams, a bitter euphemism standing in for something far cruder, yet showing the same initials, Sweet F.A. It came to mean nothing at all, worthless, empty. And so the name of a murdered child drifted into everyday speech, detached from the violence that birthed it, a quiet reminder of how easily tragedy can be absorbed, repurposed and forgotten, until all that remains is a phrase, spoken without thought, echoing a life cut brutally short. So perhaps the most oppressive truth of this story is not what Frederick Baker did, but how easily the world learned to live with it, in silence.